We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Beis Amid Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 62b. The Mishnah says, Chomer ba'avodim mi benashim, there's a stringency by slaves more than by women. Shehu mefer nidrei ishto, because when it comes to a person's wife, so the husband is able to annul the vows of his wife. V'yeno mefer nidrei avda, but he's not able to annul the vows of his eved, of his slave. And the Mishnah continues, Hafer le'ishto, let's say he annuls the vow of his wife, Hafer olamis, so then it's annulled forever. Let's say she later gets divorced or widowed, the vow is still annulled and she doesn't have to fulfill the neder. Hafer la'avdo, however, let's say he annuls the vow of a slave, and that could mean, let's say the Adon forces the slave to violate his vow, to violate his Nazirus, that is possible. So then Yotza Lecherus Umashlam Nazirusa. So then, let's say he goes free, so then the Eved will have to complete the Nazirus. The Nazirus is still going to be in effect. The point over here is that by the person's wife, the husband is actually annulling the vow no longer remains in effect. When it comes to a person's slave, so he is able to force the slave to violate the terms of the vow, but once the slave goes free, the slave is still going to have to complete the Nazirus, because that Nazirus is still in effect. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, and this is from a Tosefta, Lama Rabo Kofo L'Nazirus, Avalo L'Nadarim. Why is it that the master is able to force the slave when it comes to Nazirus, but that is not the case when it comes to Nadarim, when it comes to vows, Ula Rachan, it's not the same case when it comes to Erchin. Again, let's say you have a situation where the slave says he's going to donate the Erech. And the Gemara understands that what does the Tosefta mean when it says that the master is forcing when it comes to Nazirus, but not when it comes to Nadarim? The Gemara understands that to mean that the master is allowed to force the slave to violate the Nazirus, but he can't force the slave to violate when it comes to Nadarim, when it comes to other kinds of oaths. And so the Gemara says, Ma'ishna Gabi Nazir. Well, what is the difference? Why is it that by Nazir, the Yomer one of the pasuk says, Lesor Isser al Nafsho? It talks about his soul, B'misha Nafsho Knu Yelo, and it means to say somebody whose soul is acquired by him, who has control over himself. Yotza Eved, that comes to exclude a slave. She'ein Nafsho Knu Yelo, that his soul is not acquired by himself, and therefore the master has this power to say, you have to violate your vow when it comes to Nazirus. So Ihachi, if so, Afilu Gabi Nadarim Nami, when it comes by Nadarim as well, by other kinds of vows, the same thing should be true, and we should say that since the slave doesn't have acquisition over himself, so therefore the master should be able to force him to violate the vow. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Hacham b'mayaskin, and here what are we talking about? Kagon shaya eshkol shel anavim munach lefanav. The case is, there's a cluster of grapes in front of the Eved. Now in a situation where the Eved is a Nazir, so then he's not allowed to have any grapes. When a situation where the Eved is just in a neder, so then there's a vow from these particular grapes, but he's able to go get others. And that's what the Gemara explains. Gabi nedarim, when it comes to nedarim, the chim mitzar b'haylo mitzar b'achrini, just because he's usher by this particular cluster, doesn't mean that he's usher from other ones. So therefore, lo matzi kafile, therefore the master is not able to force him to eat those grapes. The point over here is, the master might want to force him to eat the grapes because he wants his Eved to get nourishment. Over here he can't force because he can just go get other grapes. It's not an issue. But Gabi Nazirus, but when it comes to Nazirus, the chim mitzar b'hay yitzar b'kula, that if he's prohibited from having this cluster, he's actually prohibited from all clusters of grapes, and therefore there is a real concern here of a lack of nourishment for the Eved. So therefore, matzi kafile, so therefore he's able to force him. That's the whole distinction between Nazirus and regular Nadarim. But the Gemara says, V'gabi Nadarim, but 1 second, by Nadarim we could also come up with such a case. By Nadarim also, Milo Askin, and Deleka El Hayeshkol, aren't we talking about maybe where the only available cluster of grapes is this one, and so there is a nourishment issue, and so therefore there should not be this distinction. Di'i lo achale, if he doesn't eat this cluster, chalash, he's going to be weakened. And so the Gemara answers, Elamar Rava, rather Rava says, Kagon shayachartzan munach lefanav. The case is that there's just a grape seed in front of him. That's not something that can really provide much nourishment. Gabe nedarim b'hayhu de mitzar lo matzi kafile, by nedarim, so he's also only on this one, he can't force him to violate his neder. Gabe nazir, but when it comes to nazir, the itzar nami b'achrini, whereas asr in others as well, matzi kafile. So again, the Adon is able to force the Eved to violate the Nazirus. But the Gemara again asks the same question, V'gabi nedarim milo askin delaka l'haychartzan. But by nedarim also, can't we be talking about a case where there's only this grape seed, di lo achale chalash, if he doesn't eat it, he's going to be weakened. And so the Gemara gives another interpretation instead of what the Tosefta means, that Lamar Abaya, rather Abaya says, There are some various gears over here. Some change the previous one to Abaye, and they change this one to Rava. But Elamar Abaye, rather Abaye says, Lama Rabo Tzarech Lichvosol in Nazirus, Vein Tzarech Lichvosol in Adarim. Why is it that the master needs to force him when it comes to Nazirus, and is not able to force him when it comes to other Nadarim? Vein Tzarech Lichvosol L'Shvua, and he's not able to force him when it comes to Shvua. My time, and what's the reason? Diyamar Krab, because the pasuk says Lahara Olahetiv, and what the Gemara means to say is that the Tosefta actually means that when it comes to other Nadarim and other Shvuas, they don't even take effect in the first place. There's no need to force him to violate because they're never chal. Because the pasuk says Lahara Olahetiv, and what that means is Mahatava Rishus Af Hara Rishus. So too, whatever neder he's making, whether it's for beneficial or whether it's not beneficial, it has to be a Rishus. It has to be something that is under his control, that is voluntary by him. Yatsa Lahara La'acherim. However, if you have a neder that you make which makes a negative for somebody else, in this case, the Eved making a neder is creating a negative for the master. So in that case, She'ein Rishus Biyadu, there he doesn't have Rishus to do that. You're only allowed to make a neder in a situation where the hatav or the ra'ah, where the good or the bad is a rishus. It's something that is within your purview, within your rishus. But that does not apply in the case of an Eved. He's not allowed to make a neder that's lahora la'acherim, and that's why it doesn't take effect. Whereas the Nazirus does in fact take effect. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Avar mikaneged panav. Let's say you have a situation of a slave that he runs away from his master, he isn't actually freed. Rabbi Meir Omer lo yishter. Rabbi Meir says in that case he's not able to drink the wine, meaning to say he's treated like a freed slave, and the Nazirus takes effect, he can't have the wine. Rabbi Yossi Omer yishter, but Rabbi Yossi says he can still drink the wine. The point over here is we're talking about an Eved who when he was under the control of his master, so the Nazirus didn't really take effect because his master was able to force him to get nourishment. And so now according to Rabbi Yossi, when he runs away, he has the same status, and therefore he can drink wine. He's not considered a freed slave. The Nazirus is still in effect. And the Gemara says, Leima b'deshmuel kamiflagi. Let us suggest that the machlokas in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi is a machlokas within the statement of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Hamafkir avdo yatsa lecheres. If somebody makes his Eved hefker, he declares him ownerless, so it automatically the Eved goes free. V'ein tzarech get shikhr, and there's no need for the traditional get, the document which is used to free the slave. That's not needed. He automatically goes free when he's made hefker. And that's what's happening here as well. Rabbi Meir islay de Shmuel. Rabbi Meir, he holds like Shmuel, meaning to say Rabbi Meir holds, in this case where the Eved runs away, and the master gives up hope from getting the Eved, it's the same as being mafkir the Eved, and the Eved is essentially considered a freed slave, and therefore the Nazirus takes effect. And Rabbi Yossi leslay de Shmuel, and Rabbi Yossi, he does not hold like Shmuel, and therefore he says since there was no traditional freeing of the slave, the Eved just ran away, he's still considered to be an Eved, he's still considered to be a slave, and therefore the Nazirus is not in effect, and he's able to drink wine. And the Gemara says, Lo no de kuli alma islu de Shmuel. Actually, everybody agrees with Shmuel that in a situation where an Eved is made hefker, he actually does go free. Elamanda amar yishta, rather, the one who says that he's able to drink wine in this case, meaning to say that he's not considered free, savar sof sof mahader hader v'yasi gabe. He holds that we're talking about a situation where the master doesn't necessarily give up hope of getting back the Eved. In the end, the Eved is going to return to the master, and so therefore, lishti chamra. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, he should continue to drink wine, so that he doesn't become weakened. So in this case, we are assuming that he may eventually return to the master. Therefore, the Nazirus does not take effect according to Rabbi Yossi. Now, according to the one who says that he's not allowed to drink wine, that the Nazirus takes effect, even though he's not really free, he wasn't declared ownerless in this case, but the reason is as follows: Savar lahavile tza'ara. So Rabbi Meir holds we want to actually put the Eved in pain and tell him that he has these restrictions. Ki heichi de lahader gabe. That's in order to encourage him to return to the owner by telling him that the Nazirus takes effect now that he ran away. That is going to encourage the Eved to return to his original owner, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph.